A 10-year-old girl walked into a fog-soaked Brooklyn warehouse holding a loaded Beretta and asked the one question that could shatter an empire. Where is my father? Don Vito. The Vault Santoro slowly turned from the card table where his soldiers were counting cash. 7 men in leather jackets and Italian suits stopped moving. The warehouse went silent except for the hum of dock machinery outside. Put the gun down, little girl, Vito said carefully, his voice like gravel smoothed by decades of power. You're in the wrong place. Not until someone tells me where Frankie Russo is, Maru said, her voice steady despite her size. Her denim jacket hung loose over a blue hoodie, and her hands gripped the weapon exactly like her father had taught her, two-handed, elbows locked, finger resting alongside the trigger guard. He's been missing for 48 hours, and you're the last person who saw him alive. The name Frankie Russo rippled through the room like electricity. Soldiers exchanged glances. Rocco, the monk Bellini, tall and austere in his charcoal coat, shifted his weight. Everyone here knew Frankie, the quiet cleaner who scrubbed crime scenes and kept his mouth shut. What's your full name? Vito asked, his marble eyes studying her. Maria Russo. Everyone calls me Maru. My father is Frankie the cleaner Russo, and he told me if he ever went missing, I should come to the light by the water and ask the vault the question he can't lie to. A tall enforcer named Domenico Domshot De Luca stepped forward, hand moving toward his hip. Boss, we don't need... I went to the police first, Maru interrupted loudly, making Dom freeze. They said they'd look into it. But I know Santoro money moves through the 5th precinct. The cops won't help me. The priests won't help me. My neighbors shut their windows when I knock. She adjusted her grip on the Beretta, and every man in the room noticed the precision, no wild waving, no amateur fumbling. This kid had been trained. So I came here, Maru continued, because my father said you know where every secret in Red Hook is buried. And what makes you think I'd tell a child anything? Vito asked, his tone still controlled but curiosity creeping in. Maru reached into her backpack with her left hand, keeping the gun steady in her right. She pulled out a battered stuffed rabbit with button eyes. Because I have this. She unzipped the rabbit's back seam and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a torn ledger page covered in careful block handwriting. Even from across the room, Vito could see the columns, dates, amounts, locations. My father hid this inside my toy before he disappeared, Maru said, along with a thumb drive. He taught me a code phrase he'd never used unless everything went wrong. If I'm late, go to the light by the water. Find the vault, not the cops. Ask him the question he can't lie to. Rocco spoke up, his voice thoughtful. Boss, I know this girl. I've seen her at Street Teresa's with Frankie. She lights candles every Sunday for someone who does dirty work so others don't have to. Dom scoffed. She's a kid with a gun, she doesn't know how to... Maru shifted the Beretta's aim and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the warehouse, a perfect round that tore into the concrete floor 2 inches from Dom's left boot. He stumbled back, shock and rage flashing across his face. The other soldiers reached for their weapons but froze when Vito raised one hand. Proper stance, Vito observed, almost impressed. Controlled breathing, finger discipline. Your father taught you to shoot. He taught me to protect myself, Maru said, voice slightly louder now, adrenaline breaking through. He said I might need it someday. He was right. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment below where you're watching from. Let's see how many brave souls are following Maru's story from around the world. What do you want, Maria Russo? Vito asked, sitting down slowly in a metal folding chair like a king claiming a throne. I want my father back, alive. And if I don't know where he is? You're lying, Maru said flatly. She pulled the ledger page taut. Because this page has your name on it, right next to a federal judge's. My father circled both names in red ink and wrote one word, insurance. The temperature in the room shifted. Soldiers glanced at Vito, whose expression remained carved from stone, but Rocco saw at the tiniest fissure in the vault's composure. My father also taught me to memorize numbers, Maru continued, in case someone took the ledger. So here's what I know. She began reciting, her young voice clinical and clear. October 12th, $47,000. Drop location, Serafino and Sons loading dock. Codename, Brown Sugar. November 3rd, $83,500. Valletta account transfer, Brown Sugar. December 19th, $120,000. Judge's Chambers, after hours. Brown Sugar. She paused, looking directly at Vito. I can keep going. I memorized 2 years of drops. Every date, every dollar, every name. Dom exploded. Boss, we can't let her walk out of here with that. And where would I go? Maru snapped back. Foster care? My father told me what happens to kids whose parents disappear in Red Hook. They end up in group homes run by people on your payroll, or they end up in the river. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and true. So I made a choice, Maru said, her voice cracking slightly for the first time. I came here and I brought everything my father left me. Because he told me that Vito Santoro is a lot of things: a criminal, a kingpin, a man people fear, but he's not a liar when it comes to debts. And you owe my father a debt. Vito leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What debt is that? The truth, Maru said simply. Out loud. Is my father dead? Several seconds of silence pressed down on the warehouse like a physical weight. No, Vito finally said. Frankie Russo is alive. Maru's shoulders sagged with relief so profound she almost dropped the gun. But she caught herself and raised it again. Where is he? Being held for clarity, Vito said carefully. Your father saw something he wasn't supposed to see. He recorded something he wasn't supposed to record. And he made copies insurance, like you said. Before I decide what to do with him, I need to know where all the copies are. He only made one copy, Maru said. The thumb drive. And it's not here. Where is it? Somewhere safe. Somewhere that if anything happens to me or my father, it gets delivered to people you can't pay off. Vito's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. My father spent 2 years teaching me how to survive if he disappeared, Maru shot back. Do you really think he'd leave me defenseless? Rocco stepped forward, rosary glinting at his wrist. Boss, this is a child asking for her father. There's a line. There's always a line until there isn't, Dom muttered. No, Rocco said firmly, turning to face the other soldiers. This one's different. She came here with honor. She didn't go to the feds. She didn't make a scene. She came to the man her father trusted. Trusted to do what? Vito interrupted coldly. To keep his daughter alive, Rocco finished. That's the debt. Frankie cleaned your messes for a decade. He kept quiet when others would have talked. And the one time he asks for something through his child, no less you're going to refuse? Vito stared at Rocco for a long moment, then back at Maru. I'll make you a deal, Vito said. You give me the ledger page and tell me where the thumb drive is. In exchange, I'll take you to your father. No, Maru said immediately. You take me to my father first, alive and unharmed, then we'll talk about the ledger. That's not how negotiations work. It is when I'm the only one who memorized the account passwords, Maru replied. Vito's eyes widened fractionally. She just revealed another layer of leverage. That's when they heard it. Sirens. Multiple vehicles getting closer, the wail bouncing off the waterfront buildings. Vito stood slowly. Did you call someone? No, Maru said, fear flashing across her face for the first time. But what? Dom demanded. My neighbor Mrs. Castellano followed me here. She thinks I'm in danger. She must have called 911. Rocco moved to the window. 4 patrol cars. No, 5. They're surrounding the building. Dom's hand went to his gun. Boss, if the cops find her here with that ledger... I have an idea, Maru interrupted, louder now, desperate. Let me talk to them. I'll say I ran away and you found me and were about to call my aunt. You don't have an aunt, Vito said. They don't know that. A younger soldier named Snake pulled out a tablet. Boss, I'm picking up a signal. The kid's got a phone transmitting. I don't have a phone, Maru protested. Snake walked over and unzipped her backpack fully. Tucked into the bottom, beneath notebooks and the phone she thought was there, was a second phone, smaller, older, duct-taped to the lining. Prepaid burner, Snake said, holding it up. GPS active. And... He tapped the screen. It's streaming audio. Everyone froze. Streaming to where? Vito asked, his voice deadly calm. Anonymous email drop, Snake said. Encrypted. I can't trace it without more time. Vito turned to Maru. Your father's insurance policy. Maru's face confirmed it. If I don't check in every hour, the recording gets sent to the FBI field office in Manhattan. You can shoot me. You can take the ledger. But if I die here, so does your empire. The warehouse's side door creaked open. Everyone spun, weapons drawn, except Vito, who remained perfectly still. A woman stepped into the light mid-30s, lean, wearing dock worker coveralls and a Yankees cap. She raised her hand slowly. U.S. Marshal Ada Navarro, she said calmly, showing her badge. And before anyone does something stupid, know that I've had this building under surveillance for the last 40 minutes. Impossible, Dom said. We have counter-surveillance. That I walked right past because I've been tracking Frankie Russo for 6 months, Ada interrupted. She looked at Maru. Your father's been a person of interest in a federal investigation. When he disappeared, I flagged it. When a little girl sent a message through a longshoreman to the most dangerous man in Brooklyn, I really paid attention. Maru's voice was small. Are you here to arrest me? No, kid. I'm here to make sure you don't get killed doing something brave and incredibly reckless. Ada turned to Vito. Here's what's about to happen. Those patrol cars outside? They got an anonymous tip about gunfire, which, congratulations, actually happened. You have about 90 seconds before they breach that door. So what do you suggest, Marshal? Vito asked with dangerous politeness. You let the girl walk out with me. I tell the uniforms she's a runaway I'm processing. They leave. And you and I have a conversation about Frankie Russo that benefits all of us. Why would I trust a federal agent? Because I've been trying to flip Frankie for months, and he wouldn't budge. But whatever he recorded, whatever he saw, it's bigger than your street-level operation. It goes up. Ada's eyes were hard. All the way up to a federal judge. Vito's mask cracked wider. You already knew that, Ada continued. Which means you're in just as much danger as Frankie. Maybe more. The front warehouse doors slammed open. But it wasn't the police. It was a man in an expensive overcoat, flanked by 2 private security guards in tactical gear. Late 50s, silver hair, a face that belonged on campaign posters. Sorry I'm late, the man said smoothly. Traffic on the bridge was hell. Maru's gun swung toward him instinctively. Ada's hand moved to her sidearm. Vito remained seated, but his entire body radiated tension. Who the hell are you? Dom demanded. The man smiled cold, political, empty. Judge Marcus Valente, and I'm here to collect something that belongs to me. He looked directly at the ledger page in Maru's hand. That. With all due respect, Your Honor, Ada said carefully, you have no jurisdiction here. On the contrary, Marshal Navarro, I have a court order granting me emergency custody of Maria Russo, effective immediately. He pulled a folded document from his coat. Her father, Frankie Russo, has been declared an unfit parent due to suspected criminal activity and abandonment. As a family court judge and a concerned citizen, I've taken responsibility for this child's welfare until suitable placement can be arranged. That's a lie, Maru shouted. I've never even met you. Precisely why I'm here, sweetheart. You've been failed by the system, and I'm fixing that. Ada took the document, scanned it quickly, and her face darkened. This was filed this morning, 2 hours ago. How did you even know she was missing? Anonymous tip, Valente said smoothly. Same as the police. You sent the cops here, Vito said, standing now. You wanted to box me in. I wanted to retrieve a traumatized child before she got hurt, Valente corrected. And whatever melodrama is happening in this warehouse ends now. Maria, come with me. We'll get you cleaned up, fed, and into a safe home. I'm not going anywhere with you, Maru said, gun still raised but her hands starting to shake. You don't have a choice, honey. I'm an officer of the court. You're the reason my father is missing, Maru accused. Your name is on the ledger. You took Santoro money. You helped cover up a murder. Careful, little girl. Valente's smile vanished. Slander is a serious accusation. It's not slander if I can prove it, Maru said. She reached into the rabbit again and pulled out a micro SD card so small it had been hidden in the stuffing itself. My father didn't just record audio. He recorded video. From a hidden camera he installed in the funeral home. He recorded you and Don Santoro in the embalming room, talking about the boy you killed. The air turned to ice. What boy? Ada asked quietly. Vito Santoro's son, Maru said, her young voice carrying the weight of a gravedigger. 10 years ago. He didn't die in a car fire like everyone thinks. He survived the fire, and Judge Valente's nephew suffocated him in the hospital to prevent him from testifying about a drug deal gone bad. Ada's eyes widened. The Santoro case. That file is sealed. My father was the cleaner that night, Maru continued. He was ordered to make the body look consistent with the fire, but he saw the hospital records first. The burn patterns didn't match. So he started digging. And recording. For 10 years. Vito's face had gone ashen not with fear, but with an old grief torn open. You knew, Vito said to Valente, his voice shaking with rage. You knew my son was murdered, and you helped bury it. I did what was necessary to avoid a gang war, Valente said coldly. Your son was collateral damage in a conflict you started. I made it go away to keep this city from burning. By letting my boy's killer walk free. By protecting the balance of power, which your pet janitor has now threatened. Valente's security guards moved forward. Maru's Beretta tracked to the first guard's knee a non-lethal shot, just like her father taught her for when killing wasn't necessary but stopping was. Take one more step and I'll prove I'm not bluffing, Maru said. Shoot a federal judge's security detail and you'll spend your childhood in juvenile detention, Valente warned. Shoot in self-defense and she walks. Ada countered, her own weapon now drawn and aimed at the guards. I'm a federal witness to a corrupt judge attempting to kidnap a minor under false pretenses. You're outnumbered, Marshal. Actually, said a new voice from the shadows, she's not. Rocco stepped fully into the light, his weapon aimed at Valente, then Snake, then 3 more soldiers. Dom looked at Vito, confused. Boss? Vito's eyes were locked on Valente with a hatred that could melt steel. If what this child says is true, Vito said slowly, then you've been lying to me for a decade. You made me bury my son's memory. You made me believe it was an accident. You took my grief and turned it into a leash. I kept you out of prison, Valente hissed. You kept yourself rich, Rocco corrected. Brown sugar wasn't just a code name for cash drops. It was a shell account Judge Valente used to funnel Santoro money into offshore holdings. I've suspected for years but couldn't prove it. Valente's composure finally cracked. You have no idea what you're interfering with. This goes beyond Brooklyn, beyond New York. You pull this thread and entire systems collapse. Good, Maru said. They should. That's when the real police arrived. But not the patrol cars from before, those had quietly withdrawn on orders from above. Instead it was a convoy of black SUVs with federal plates. Through the warehouse doors poured a dozen agents and FBI windbreakers, weapons drawn, commanded by a woman in a sharp suit. Special Agent Chen, FBI Public Corruption Unit, she announced. Judge Marcus Valente, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, accessory to murder, and obstruction of justice. Valente went pale. This is entrapment. This is a 3-year investigation that just got the break we needed, Chen interrupted. She looked at Ada. Marshal Navarro, thank you for the heads up. Ada nodded to Maru. Thank the kid. She's the one who pressed play on her father's insurance policy. Chen approached Maru carefully. Is that the SD card? Maru nodded, clutching it tight. I'm going to need that for evidence, but I promise you, we'll make copies, and we'll protect your father. Where is he? Maru asked, voice breaking. Please, I just want my dad. Chen's expression softened. We're working on that, but we need you to trust us. He's in container 14B, Vito said quietly. Everyone turned. At the port terminal, Vito continued. Section K. A climate-controlled storage unit I use for sensitive assets. Frankie's alive. Sedated, but alive. I was keeping him until I could figure out what to do. And what were you planning to do? Chen asked coldly. Vito looked at Maru. I don't kill children's fathers. Not anymore. Agent Chen coordinated with port security while medics were dispatched. Vito was placed in handcuffs cooperating, but still under arrest. His soldiers were separated for questioning. Maru stood in the warehouse, suddenly very small and very tired, the adrenaline draining out of her like water from a broken vessel. Ada Navarro knelt beside her. You did it, kid. You saved your father. Is he going to be okay? Maru asked. Physically? Yeah. The rest. Ada trailed off. He's going to be in protective custody for a while. There's going to be trials, testimony. It's going to be hard. Will I be able to see him? The moment we confirm he's stable, you'll be the first person we bring. Rocco, still uncuffed because he'd cooperated immediately, approached carefully. Can I say something? Ada nodded. Rocco looked at Maru. Your father used to come to confession. Never said much. But one time, He told Father Mike he was afraid his daughter would grow up thinking the world was only monsters. That she'd never see the good guys. He smiled faintly. I think she's looking at one in the mirror. Maru's eyes filled with tears. You walked into a room full of killers with nothing but your father's gun and his memory. Rocco continued. You didn't flinch. You didn't beg. You demanded the truth. That's not something most adults can do. I was terrified, Maru admitted. That's what made it brave. As the FBI processed the scene, and the warehouse slowly emptied of both criminals and law enforcement, Maru clutched her stuffed rabbit and thought about the 48 hours that had led to this moment. It had started 2 nights ago with her father coming home late, smelling like formaldehyde and fear. Flashback. 2 nights ago. Tuesday, 6:47 p.m. The Russo apartment, Red Hook. Frankie Russo walked through the door, carrying takeout from the corner diner, chicken fingers and fries for Maru, a turkey club for himself that he wouldn't finish. She'd known immediately something was wrong. Not because he looked scared, her father never looked scared, but because he looked careful, the way people move when they know they're being watched. Hey kiddo, he'd said, setting the food on their small kitchen table. How was school? Fine. We had a math test. Yeah? How'd you do? Perfect score. Maru had smiled, proud. Even the word problem about the coordinates. Frankie had frozen for just a heartbeat, then continued unpacking the food. Coordinates, huh? Like map stuff? Yeah, if you start at point 40.6736 north, 74.0144 west, and move 3 blocks southeast, where do you end up? Her father had looked at her, then really looked, and something passed between them that felt like goodbye disguised as homework. Dock 9, Frankie had said quietly. You'd end up at Dock 9, by the old shipyard. That's what I wrote. Good. That's real good, Maru. He'd sat down across from her, hands folded like he was about to pray or confess. I need to teach you something tonight, after dinner. Something important. More math? Sort of. But this kind of math you gotta memorize. No writing it down, just up here. He'd tapped his temple. Maru had felt her stomach tighten, the way it did before storms. Why? Because if I'm ever late, really late, not just stuck in traffic late, you're gonna need to know some things. Codes. Numbers. Names. Dad, you're scaring me. I know, baby. I'm sorry. Frankie had reached across and squeezed her hand. But scared and prepared is better than scared and helpless, right? She'd nodded, unable to speak. That night, after the dishes were done, Frankie had pulled out her bedtime book Where the Wild Things Are and opened to the inside cover. Written in pencil, so faint you'd miss it if you weren't looking, were columns of numbers. These look like page numbers, her father had said. But they're not. They're account numbers, wire transfers, dates. I need you to read them out loud 3 times, then we're erasing them. Why? Insurance, Maru. In case someone tries to make me disappear. Someone like who? Frankie had hesitated, then answered with the truth she deserved. Someone like the men I work for. After she'd memorized the numbers 43 separate entries, her child's brain absorbing them like song lyrics, Frankie had brought out Mr. Hoppy, her stuffed rabbit. She'd had him since she was 3, one ear chewed, button eyes loose. I need to borrow this guy for a minute, Frankie had said. He'd taken a small sewing kit from the junk drawer and carefully opened the seam along Mr. Hoppy's back. From his pocket, he'd pulled 2 things, a micro SD card no bigger than a fingernail and a folded piece of paper torn from a ledger book. This, he'd said, tucking both items deep into the stuffing, is why I might be late. What's on it? The truth, about something bad that happened a long time ago. Something I helped cover up because I was too scared to do the right thing. His voice had cracked. I recorded everything I know. Conversations, confessions, proof. Proof of what? That powerful people killed a kid and got away with it. That they've been using dirty money to stay powerful. That I've been cleaning their messes for 10 years. Maru's eyes had filled with tears. Are they going to hurt you? They're going to try to make me erase the evidence, but I won't. Which means... Frankie had sewn the seam closed with shaking hands. Which means you need to know the phrase. The one I'll never say unless everything's gone wrong. What phrase? If I'm late, go to the light by the water. Find the vault, not the cops. Ask him the question he can't lie to. The vault? You mean Don Santoro? He's a criminal, Maru. But he's a criminal with a code, and he owes me a debt he doesn't even know about. Frankie had handed back Mr. Hoppy, freshly stitched. If you ever have to use this, you bring the rabbit. You find Vito Santoro. And you ask him one question. Where is my father? He'll know you're my daughter. He'll know I wouldn't send you unless it was life or death. Why won't I go to the police? Because the police work for the judge whose name is on that ledger. Maru had clutched Mr. Hoppy, terrified. I don't want you to be late. Me neither, baby, me neither. Thursday, 4:15 p.m., 48 hours missing. When Frankie didn't come home Wednesday night, Maru had waited. When he didn't call, didn't text, didn't send any sign, she'd run the decision tree he'd made her practice. Cops? No. 5th Precinct took Santoro money. She'd heard her father say it a dozen times. School counselor? No. Mandated reporters meant child services, and child services meant foster homes, some of which, her father had warned, were pipelines for worse things. Priest? She'd gone to Street Teresa's during Thursday's early mass and lit a candle. Father Mike had asked if she was okay. She'd almost told him. Almost. But then she'd seen Rocco Bellini in the back pew, praying, and remembered her father's warning. The church knows, but the church stays quiet. That's how they survive. Go to the light by the water. Maru had gone home, emptied her piggy bank $43 in crumpled bills and quarters, and packed her backpack. Mr. Hoppy. The Beretta from the locked box under her father's bed. She knew the combination. Her birthday. A box cutter. A prepaid phone her father had taped to the inside lining 6 months ago with instructions written on a sticky note. Turn on. Dial this number. Press 3 to start recording. It uploads automatically. You're never alone if this is on. She'd also packed a peanut butter sandwich, because even in crisis, her father's voice in her head said, "You can't think on an empty stomach." Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Brooklyn waterfront. Tommy Two-Ton Caruso was a longshoreman who owed Frankie a favor, something about Frankie cleaning up a scene before Tommy's cousin got implicated. Maru had found him near Pier 7, smoking a cigarette by a shipping container. "You're Frankie's kid," Tommy had said, not a question. "I need you to deliver a message to Don Santoro." Tommy had laughed, then stopped when he saw her face. "You serious?" "My father's missing. I need to talk to Vito Santoro. Tonight. At Dock 9. Kid, you can't just summon." Maru had held out the $43. "My father said you'd help. He said you were a good man who paid his debts." Tommy had stared at the money, then at the little girl holding it, then sighed like a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. "What do you want me to say?" "Tell him Maria Russo has his ledger. Tell him to come to Dock 9 at 8 p.m. Tell him to bring everyone he trusts, because what I have to say, they all need to hear." "Jesus, kid. You got a death wish?" "I've got a father to find." Tommy had taken the money not because he needed it, but because refusing felt like dishonoring Frankie's memory. "If you don't walk out of that warehouse tomorrow morning, I'm gonna feel like shit forever." "Then pray I do." Thursday, 7:45 p.m. Federal Building, Manhattan. Deputy U.S. Marshal Ada Navarro had been tracking Frankie Russo for 6 months as part of a joint task force investigating judicial corruption. Frankie was the Kia cleaner with access, evidence, and motivation to flip. But he'd refused every approach. Polite, terrified, loyal to a fault. When he disappeared Wednesday night, Ada's surveillance team had flagged it immediately. No body, no blood, just gone. Then, Thursday evening, her CI and the Longshoremen's Union had called with something bizarre. Frankie Russo's 10-year-old daughter just hired Tommy Caruso to deliver a message to Vito Santoro. She's calling a meet. Tonight. Ada had hung up and stared at her caseboard, where Frankie's photo was pinned beside Judge Valente's and Santoro's. A child walking into a mob negotiation. With leverage. "She's got something," Ada had said aloud to her empty office. Frankie gave her the evidence. She'd grabbed her coat, her sidearm, and her portable surveillance kit, and headed for Red Hook. "If that kid walks into that warehouse, I'm going to be the only law enforcement in 100 yards she can trust." Thursday, 8:52 p.m. Warehouse, Dock 9. The memory snapped closed as Maru stood in the warehouse, surrounded by federal agents and the shattered remains of Don Santoro's empire. Agent Chen approached, phone to her ear, then knelt beside Maru. "We've got eyes on container 14B. Your father's alive, sedated but stable. Medics are with him now." Maru's knees buckled with relief. Ada caught her. "Can I see him?" "Soon, I promise." Across the warehouse, Vito Santoro sat in handcuffs, flanked by agents. He looked up and met Maru's eyes. For the first time since she'd walked into his world with a gun and a question, the vault looked almost human. "Your father," Vito said, his voice rough. "He saved my son's life that night, for 20 minutes, kept him breathing when everyone else ran. I never knew that until tonight." "And then someone took those 20 minutes away," Maru said quietly. "Yeah, they did. That's why you kept him alive. You needed to know if he remembered." Vito nodded slowly. "I needed to know if there was a man left in the world who'd seen my boy's face and didn't lie about it." "There is," Maru said, "and he's my father." Agent Chen's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, and her face went pale. "What?" Ada asked. "Container 14B. They opened it." "And?" "Frankie's gone." Maru's world tilted. "What do you mean gone?" Ada demanded. "I mean the container's empty except for a chair with cut restraints and a blood trail leading to the water." Everyone turned to Vito. "I didn't order that," he said, genuine shock in his voice. "I told you where he was." "Then who moved him?" Chen snapped. A younger agent ran in, tablet in hand. "Ma'am, we just pulled traffic cam footage from the port. 20 minutes ago, a black van entered the terminal with a federal judiciary seal on the plates." "Judge Valente," Ada breathed. "He made a call before we arrested him," Chen realized. "Someone got to Frankie first." Maru felt the Beretta's weight in her waistband, confiscated but still haunting her hands. "Then we find him again," she said, voice steel. "I didn't come this far to lose him now." Just when you thought Maru had won, the game changed. Frankie's gone, the judge made his move, and now a little girl has to outsmart an entire corrupt system to get her father back. What happens next will leave you speechless. Hit that like button if you're still with Maru, and drop a comment telling me, who do you think took Frankie? Let's find out. Vito Santoro hadn't thought about his son's face in 3 years. Not the real face, the one before the fire. He'd trained himself to remember only photographs, frozen moments where Antonio smiled at birthday parties or graduation ceremonies, safe memories, curated grief. But this girl, this 10-year-old with her father's gun and her father's leverage, had just torn open the vault he'd spent a decade sealing. Frankie was the cleaner that night. Vito stared at Maru across the warehouse floor, seeing past her to that October night 10 years ago. The hospital, the private room where they'd brought his son's body. The burns were catastrophic, they'd said. Closed casket, they'd recommended. And then, hours later, a quiet man in coveralls had arrived to prepare the remains for viewing. Frankie Russo, a nobody, a janitor with gentle hands and eyes that apologized for being alive when other people were dead. Vito had watched through the viewing window as Frankie worked not because he wanted to, but because leaving felt like abandonment. And in one unguarded moment, Frankie had paused, looked down at Antonio's face, and whispered something Vito couldn't hear through the glass. That nobody, that janitor, had been the last person to see Antonio's face unmarred by the mortician's reconstruction. The last witness to who his boy had actually been. Vito had hated him for it ever since. Not because Frankie had done anything wrong, but because some debts are too painful to acknowledge, and some witnesses hold truths too heavy to carry. Now Frankie's daughter stood in his warehouse, holding a ledger that could destroy him, demanding her father back. Debts, Vito thought bitterly. They always come due. "Let's talk terms," Vito said, his voice controlled again, the momentary crack in his composure sealed. "You want your father. I want that ledger and the location of the thumb drive. We can make a trade." "No," Maru said immediately. "I told you. Father first, then we negotiate." "You're in no position." "I'm in every position," Maru interrupted, and for a heartbeat she sounded exactly like Frankie. Quiet, certain, immovable. "Because I don't just have the ledger. I have the passwords, the account numbers, the transfer protocols." She adjusted her stance, Mr. Hoppy tucked under one arm, gun steady in her other hand. October 12th, $47,000 to account VB2847 at Valletta International. Routing code 30082. November 3rd, $83,500 to the same account. Different routing 30091. December 19th, $120,000 wired from the judge's chambers using a burner laptop. MAC address, Foxtrot Echo 47 Bravo. Vito's face remained stone, but his fingers twitched the only tell. Brown Sugar isn't just a code name, Maru continued. It's a shell corporation registered in Malta under the name Sweetwater Holdings LLC. The beneficial owner is listed as... Enough, Vito said quietly. Listed as your accountant, who died in a car accident 6 months after my father started recording conversations. The room went silent except for the distant sound of foghorns on the water. Dom stepped forward, hand near his weapon. Boss, we can't let her walk out of here knowing all that. She already knows, Rocco said from the side, his voice calm but firm. Killing her doesn't erase her memory. It just guarantees the thumb drive gets released. Then we find the drive. You won't, Maru said. My father was smart. It's with someone you can't threaten, someone who doesn't even know what they have. Vito studied her, recalculating. You're lying. Am I? Maru met his gaze without flinching. My father told me, the best insurance is the kind your enemies can't defuse. So he gave the drive to someone who'd never think to look at it. Someone who'd just put it in a drawer and forget about it. Unless I don't come home. Then they get a letter explaining what to do. It was a bluff partially. The drive was in Mr. Hoppy. But the setup, the misdirection, the psychology that was pure Frankie. Vito leaned back, reassessing. You're your father's daughter. I am. Dom's patience snapped. This is insane. She's a kid. We grab her, take the rabbit, and end this. He moved toward Maru. Rocco blocked his path. Move, monk, Dom growled. No. That's an order from the boss. The boss didn't give that order, Rocco said, eyes flicking to Vito. Did you, boss? Vito said nothing, which was answer enough. This isn't omerta, Dom protested. This is suicide. She has evidence that could reveal a truth we've been running from for 10 years, Rocco finished. A truth about a boy who didn't die the way we've been telling ourselves he died. Dom's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know I'm tired of pretending, Rocco said quietly. I know I'm tired of watching us become the thing we swore we'd never be. There's a code, Dom. We don't hurt children. We don't kill fathers in front of their daughters, and we sure as hell don't build empires on the graves of innocent kids. The Santoro boy wasn't innocent. He was 17, Vito said, his voice like a hammer on stone. Whatever he did, whatever mistake he made, he was still a boy. My boy. The room held its breath. And if this girl is telling the truth, Vito continued, if Frankie recorded evidence that Antonio was murdered, not killed in an accident, but murdered, then I want to hear it. Dom backed down, jaw tight, hand dropping from his weapon. Rocco nodded once to Vito, a gesture of respect, and stepped aside. Vito stood slowly, like a king rising from an invisible throne. He walked closer to Maru, not threatening, just closing the distance between interrogator and witness. I'm going to ask you a question, Vito said. If you answer it correctly, I'll believe your father trained you. I'll believe he trusted you with everything, and I'll take you to him. Maru's grip tightened on the Beretta. Ask. If Frankie were alive and hiding not in a container, not held by me, but hiding on his own, where would he go? What kind of place? Maru didn't hesitate. Someplace cold with music, where he could hear voices without being seen. Vito's face drained of color. What does that mean? Dom asked, confused. But Vito knew. He knew exactly. The prep room at Serafino and Sons, Vito said, voice barely above a whisper. The embalming room. It has a vent that opens into the funeral chapel. You can hear the services, the eulogies, the prayers. My father hid there once, Maru said, when someone was looking for him. He told me it was the only place he felt safe, because the dead don't judge and the living don't look. Vito closed his eyes briefly, not in defeat, but in recognition. She's telling the truth. Frankie told her everything. Outside, parked 3 blocks away in an unmarked sedan, Ada Navarro sat with headphones on, listening to the live audio feed from Maru's hidden phone. The quality was rough, muffled by the backpack, but clear enough. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the text. Container 14B, Port Terminal K, climate controlled. Check the refrigeration logs. Another buzz. The girl's right. About all of it. Ada's fingers flew across her phone, running the number through federal databases. It pinged back, registered to a Brooklyn Parish burner phone network. Untraceable by design. But the phrasing the girl's right told her everything. Someone inside Santoro's circle was breaking ranks. Ada texted back, "Who is this?" The response came 30 seconds later. "Someone who lights candles for people who do dirty work." Ada's breath caught. She'd seen Rocco Bellini at Street Teresa's during surveillance. Praying. Always praying. She typed quickly, "Can you confirm Frankie's alive?" "I can confirm the boss doesn't kill without reason, and he just found one." Back in the warehouse, Vito made his decision. "I'll take you to your father," he said to Maru. "The ledger and the rabbit come with us. No trades until you see him alive. After that, we negotiate." "How do I know you won't just kill us both?" Maru asked. "You don't, but I'm giving you my word, and in my world that still means something." Rocco stepped forward. "I'll go with them, boss. As witness." Vito nodded. "Dom, Snake, you're with us. The rest stay here in case the cops show up asking questions." Dom looked like he wanted to argue, but the look in Vito's eyes shut him down. Maru lowered the gun slightly, not surrendering it, but acknowledging the shift. "Where is he?" "Not far. Port terminal. Container storage. He's cold, sedated, but breathing." Vito pulled on his overcoat. "And if what you say is true, if he really recorded what happened to my son, then I need to hear it before I decide what to do with him." "You'll let him go," Maru said with a certainty that bordered on reckless. "Why would I do that?" "Because," Maru said, tucking Mr. Hoppy back into her backpack and following Vito toward the warehouse exit, "my father didn't just record your secrets. He recorded your son's last words. And don't you want to know what Antonio said before he died?" Vito stopped walking. The entire room froze. "You're lying," Vito said, but his voice cracked. 20 minutes, Maru said quietly. "My father kept your son alive for 20 minutes while everyone else ran. And Antonio talked. My father recorded it all." Vito turned, and for the first time, the vault looked breakable. "Then let's go," he said hoarsely. "Right now." They walked into the Brooklyn night. A Mafia Don and a 10-year-old girl, both chasing ghosts they couldn't bury. 3 black SUVs rolled through Red Hook like a funeral procession, slow, deliberate, headlights cutting through the fog that rolled off the East River. In the middle vehicle, Maru sat wedged between Rocco and the window, her Beretta resting on her lap under Vito's watchful eye. Mr. Hoppy clutched against her chest like a shield. Vito rode in the passenger seat up front, silent as carved marble. Dom drove, knuckles white on the steering wheel, jaw working like he was chewing glass. Snake followed in the second vehicle with 2 more soldiers. The third SUV held cleanup crewmen, whose job was to make problems disappear. Maru watched the city slide past bodegas with security gates, corner boys huddled against the cold, a woman pushing a shopping cart full of returnable bottles. Normal people living normal lives while she rode in a convoy of killers toward a container that might hold her father's body. "He's alive," she told herself. Vito said he's alive. But Vito also said her father was being held for clarity, which was just another word for leverage, and leverage only worked if both sides had something to lose. Maru had the ledger. Vito had her father. The math was simple and terrible. "You scared?" Rocco asked quietly, not looking at her. "Yes," Maru admitted. "Good. That means you're smart." "Are you scared?" Rocco's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Every single day." 3 blocks behind the convoy, Ada Navarro drove with her headlights off, guided by the tracker she'd placed on the lead SUV during the warehouse chaos. Her phone was patched into FBI tactical frequency, and Agent Chen's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Navarro, confirm. Are we moving to intercept?" "Negative," Ada said. "Not yet. Let them lead us to Frankie. We go in too early. They scatter or someone gives an order we can't take back." "The girl's in that vehicle." "I know. Which is why we stay close but don't spook them." Ada watched the red dot on her GPS move toward the port terminal. "Have the Port Authority shut down vehicle exits. Make it look routine shift change, security drill, whatever. I want those containers surrounded but not swarmed." "Copy. How tight a perimeter?" "Invisible until I give the word. Santoro's smart. If he smells law enforcement, this turns into a hostage situation." Chen paused. "It already is a hostage situation." "No," Ada corrected. "Right now it's a negotiation. Let's keep it that way." She disconnected and radioed her own team 3 unmarked SUVs filled with deputy marshals who'd been shadowing Frankie Russo's case for months. Units 2 and 3, parallel streets. Unit 4, you're on the water side. Eyes only until my signal. If you see the girl in immediate danger, you have green light to intervene. Otherwise, we wait. A chorus of confirmations crackled back. Ada gripped the steering wheel and prayed this gamble didn't end with a child's funeral. Rocco watched Maru from the corner of his eye, small hands gripping the rabbit, lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been memorized numbers. He'd seen her before tonight, of course. Street. Teresa's. Sunday mornings. Always in the back pew with Frankie, lighting candles at the votives by the side altar. One Sunday, maybe 4 months ago, Rocco had knelt beside them to light his own candle. Maru had looked up at him with those serious dark eyes and asked, "Who are you praying for?" "People I've hurt," Rocco had answered honestly. "People I couldn't save." "Me too," Maru had said. "I'm praying for someone who does dirty work so others don't have to." Rocco had glanced at Frankie, who'd kept his eyes down, lighting another candle. "That's a good prayer," Rocco had told her. Now, sitting beside her in a vehicle full of weapons and bad intentions, Rocco wondered if God was testing him, offering a chance to save one child to balance against the dozens he'd failed to protect over the years. Omerta says stay silent. Conscience says speak. He pulled his phone from his pocket, pretending to check messages, and typed quickly under the dashboard's shadow. 14B confirmed. Girl safe for now. Be ready. He sent it to the number he'd used once before, the federal agent he'd watched shadow Frankie through the neighborhood, the one who looked like she actually cared. Then he tucked the phone away and fingered the rosary at his wrist. "You believe in God?" Maru asked suddenly. Rocco startled. "Yeah, I do." "Does he forgive bad people?" "He forgives people who try to be better." Maru was quiet for a moment. "Then there's hope for all of us." 20 blocks away, in the Santoro family house in Bay Ridge, Nonna Lucia Santoro sat in her armchair by the window, counting invisible rosary beads and murmuring numbers that had once been debts, territories, names. The night nurse, Maria, had long ago stopped trying to make sense of the old woman's ramblings. Dementia was a thief that stole everything but the oldest memories, and Lucia lived somewhere between 1952 and yesterday, convinced her son Vito was still a boy who needed reminding to do his homework. 47,000, Lucia murmured. 83.5, brown sugar, sweet like Valente's boy. The nephew, always the nephew. Maria looked up from her magazine. "What was that, Nonna?" Lucia's eyes sharpened, one of those rare moments when the fog lifted and the woman who'd once kept the Santoro books in her head returned. "Valente," Lucia said clearly. "Marcus Valente. His nephew killed Antonio. Not the fire. The fire was a cover. The boy talked too much. Saw too much. The nephew put a pillow over his face in the hospital room. Vito doesn't know. Nobody told him. They paid the nurse. They paid the doctor. They buried the truth with my grandson." Maria froze. "Nonna, that's just the confusion talking." "I'm not confused." Lucia snapped, decades of sharpness cutting through. "I kept the books. I know where every body is buried, every dollar, every secret, and I know what they did to my Antonio." She gripped Maria's wrist with surprising strength. "You call my Vito. You tell him Lucia remembers. You tell him the judge's nephew is the one. He needs to know before." The clarity flickered. "Before?" Lucia's eyes clouded again. "Before the bread burns. Did I leave the oven on?" Maria gently freed her wrist, heart pounding. She looked at her phone, debating. Call Vito Santoro and tell him his mother just accused a judge's nephew of murder? She set the phone down. Some messages were too dangerous to deliver. But Lucia kept murmuring, even as the fog returned. "Valente. The nephew. Tell Vito. Tell my boy." Vito stared through the windshield at the industrial wasteland of the port-stacked containers, rusted cranes, the skeletal remains of Brooklyn's shipping past. His empire was built on these docks. Every container that moved through here paid tribute. Every ship that berthed greased the right palms. But empires were just elaborate tombs, and his had been built on his son's grave. Antonio's last words. That's what the girl had said. That Frankie recorded them. 20 minutes of life between the fire and the silence. Vito had spent 10 years believing his son died instantly, painlessly, that the fire had taken him before fear could. But if Maru was telling the truth, if Antonio had lived, had spoken, then every prayer Vito had said, every candle he'd lit, every donation to street, Teresa's had been built on a lie he'd told himself to survive the grief. What did you say, Antonio? Did you call for me? Did you forgive me for being the kind of father whose world burned you? The ledger didn't matter. The money didn't matter. Even the judge and the corruption and the evidence, none of it mattered compared to the possibility of hearing his son's voice one more time. How far? Vito asked. 2 minutes, Dom said. Vito nodded and made his choice. If Frankie has my son's voice, I'll burn my own empire to hear it. The convoy pulled through the terminal gates, past the security booth where a guard waved them through, without question bought, like everything else. The SUVs navigated rows of shipping containers stacked 4 high steel monoliths in red, blue, green, each stamped with company logos and identification codes. Section K. Climate-controlled storage. The vehicles stopped in a loose semicircle around a standalone container marked 14B, refrigeration unit humming on the side. Doors opened. Men stepped out, hands near weapons, breath misting in the cold. Maru climbed out slowly, Beretta tucked into her jacket, Mr. Hoppy under her arm. The container loomed before her like a metal coffin. "He's in there?" she asked, voice small. "He's in there," Vito confirmed. Around them, shadows moved Ada's team, invisible in the darkness between containers, weapons trained, waiting. Rocco positioned himself beside Maru, a silent guardian. Dom and Snake flanked Vito. "Open it," Vito ordered. One of the soldiers approached the container, keyed in the access code on the electronic lock. The mechanism beeped, clicked. The heavy steel door groaned on its hinges. Cold air exhaled from the darkness, freezer breath that smelled of metal and fear. Vito stepped forward, gesturing for Maru to follow. She did. Heart hammering, Mr. Hoppy clutched tight. The door swung fully open. Inside, lit by a single battery-powered lamp, was a metal chair. Restraints hung loose, cut clean through. And the container was empty. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The container stood open, exhaling freezer air that turned their breath to ghost-white clouds. The metal chair sat bolted to the floor, restraints dangling like shed skin. A single battery-powered lamp cast harsh shadows across corrugated steel walls. Empty. "No," Maru whispered, the word breaking on her lips. "No, no, no. Boss, I swear he was here," Snake started, pulling up his tablet to check surveillance logs. Dom turned on Vito, rage and confusion warring on his face. Someone moved him. Someone knew. "Wait." Rocco stepped into the container, head cocked. "You hear that?" Everyone fell silent. A sound. Faint. Rhythmic. Breathing. Rocco moved to the back wall and pressed his palm against the steel. "It's cold here. Colder than the rest." He traced the seam along the panel. "This is a false wall. There's another chamber." Vito shoved past him, fingers finding the hidden latch. He yanked. The panel swung inward with a metallic groan. And there, in a space barely 5 feet deep, a hidden refrigeration compartment designed for smuggling, sat Frankie Russo. He was strapped to a second chair with zip ties, head lolled forward, lips tinged blue from the cold. His cleaner's coveralls were torn at the shoulder, and frost clung to his hair like premature gray. But his chest rose and fell shallow, labored breaths that fogged in the frozen air. "Dad!" Maru screamed. She shoved past Vito, dropping Mr. Hoppy, the Beretta swinging wild as she scrambled into the hidden chamber. Her hands shook as she dug the box cutter from her backpack, sawing frantically at the plastic restraints. "I found you, I found you, I found you." "Maru?" Frankie's voice was a rasp, eyes fluttering open, unfocused. "Baby? You can't be here." "I'm here, Dad. I'm getting you out." The zip ties snapped. Frankie slumped forward, and Maru caught him with strength she didn't know a 10-year-old could have. Adrenaline, fear, love, all of it holding him upright. "He's hypothermic," Rocco said, stepping in to help. "We need heat, blankets." "We need the ledger," Dom interrupted from the container entrance. His voice was flat, cold. "Now, before this gets more complicated." Vito stood in the opening between the outer container and the hidden chamber, backlit by the terminal lights, face unreadable. "The girl kept her word," he said. "She led us to her father. Now she keeps the other half of the bargain." "Dad can barely stand," Maru protested. Which is why you're going to give me the rabbit, Vito said, extending his hand. Then we get him medical attention. No, the deal was... Dom raised his weapon, aiming directly at Frankie's head. The deal, Dom said, just changed. Everything froze. Frankie's eyes cleared, focusing on the gun, then on his daughter. Maru, give him... No, Maru said, voice shaking but certain. She shifted, putting herself between Dom and her father. You shoot him. You get nothing. The ledger, the drive, the recordings, all of it goes to the FBI. You're bluffing, Dom said. I'm not. Dom, lower the weapon, Rocco ordered. Stay out of this, Monk. This isn't what the boss... The boss wants his son's last words, Dom snapped. And I'm making sure he gets them. He cocked the hammer. Little girl, you have 3 seconds. Maru's hand moved to her jacket. Don't, Vito warned. But Maru was already pulling the Beretta, the same smooth motion her father had drilled into her on quiet nights in their kitchen, the same controlled draw that separated defense from murder. She pivoted, aimed, and fired. The crack split the night like lightning hitting steel. Dom's shoulder erupted bone, blood, fabric, and the impact spun him sideways into the container wall with a hollow clang. His weapon clattered to the floor. He collapsed, screaming, clutching the wound. Shock rippled through the container yard. Snake's hand went to his gun. Vito's men in the outer vehicle started moving. Then the world exploded with light. Floodlights ignited from 6 positions mounted on containers, vehicles, portable stands, turning the yard into a stage. Loudspeakers crackled to life. Federal agents, nobody move! Ada Navarro's voice, amplified and absolute. Unmarked SUVs roared from concealment, blocking every exit. Deputy marshals in tactical gear poured into the yard, rifles raised, red laser sights dancing across the container. Drop your weapons, hands where we can see them. Port Authority gates slammed shut with mechanical finality, escape routes severed. Vito's men froze, guns half drawn, trapped in the mathematics of overwhelming force. Stand down, Rocco shouted, throwing his weapon to the ground. Everybody stand down. Snake dropped his pistol. The other soldiers hesitated, looking to Vito. Don Vito Santoro stood in the container opening, spotlights carving his face into harsh planes, hands at his sides. Around him, a dozen federal agents shouted commands, weapons trained on his chest. He could give the order. His men would fight. Some of them would die. Maybe all of them. And for what? A ledger he'd tried to bury. A secret he'd paid a judge to keep. A son's voice he'd never heard and couldn't resurrect. Vito looked at Maru, this tiny girl holding a smoking gun, standing over her father like a wolf guarding its pack, and saw the truth he'd been avoiding for 10 years. Some vaults were never meant to stay closed. Slowly, deliberately, Vito raised his hands. Lower your weapons, he said to his men, voice carrying across the yard. It's over. Boss. It's over, Vito repeated louder. Stand down. One by one, guns hit the pavement. An old king choosing winter. Ada Navarro advanced with her sidearm drawn, 4 marshals flanking her. She reached Vito first, spinning him around, cuffing him with practiced efficiency. Vito Santoro, you're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy. Save it, Vito said tiredly. I know the charges. Ada moved to the container, weapon sweeping for threats, then holstering when she saw the scene. Maru, kneeling beside her father, Rocco hovering protectively, Dom bleeding and cursing against the wall. Medics, Ada barked. Now. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and medical bags. The girl shot me, Dom snarled. Arrest her. Shut up, Ada said, not even looking at him. She knelt beside Maru. You okay, kid? Maru nodded, shaking, tears streaming. My dad, he's so cold. We've got him, Ada signaled the medics. Hypothermia, possible sedation. Get him warmed up, get him stable. Frankie tried to sit up. Maru, you came for me. I had to, Dad. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing. I couldn't let them take you. You shot someone, Frankie whispered, horror and pride mixing in his voice. You taught me to protect what matters. Maru pulled back, looking at him with those serious dark eyes. You matter. Agent Chen arrived in a tactical SUV, stepping out with the kind of calm that came from years of closing cases. She surveyed the scene: armed agents, detained mobsters, one little girl holding the key to everything, and allowed herself a thin smile. Marshal Navarro, status? Suspect secured. Frankie Russo recovered, alive. One gunshot wound, non-fatal. Ada gestured to Maru. And one very brave kid who just brought down a crime family. Chen approached Maru carefully. I need the evidence, Maria. The ledger, the recording, all of it. Maru hesitated, looking to her father. Frankie nodded weakly. It's okay, baby. Give it to her. It's time. Maru picked up Mr. Hoppy from where she'd dropped him, unzipped the back seam with shaking fingers, and pulled out the folded ledger page and the micro SD card. There's more on the prepaid phone in my backpack, she said, voice small. My dad set it up to stream recordings. And I memorized the account numbers. All of them. Chen took the evidence, handling it like sacred text. You did good, Maria. You did really, really good. She bagged the rabbit, stained, torn, stuffed with secrets that would topple judges and crime bosses alike. Paramedics lifted Frankie onto the stretcher. Maru refused to let go of his hand. Can I go with him? She asked Ada. Yeah, kid, you can. As they wheeled Frankie toward the ambulance, Vito cuffed, flanked by marshals, called out. Frankie! The stretcher stopped. Frankie turned his head, meeting Vito's eyes across the container yard. My son, Vito said, voice breaking for the first time anyone could remember. What did Antonio say? Before he... Frankie was quiet for a long moment. He said, Tell my dad I'm sorry. Tell him I tried. Vito's face crumpled, a lifetime of control shattered in 5 seconds. And then, Frankie continued, gentler now, he said. Tell him I loved him, even when I was scared of him. I loved him. Vito sank to his knees on the cold pavement, marshals holding him upright, and wept like a man who'd finally unlocked the vault he'd been trapped inside for 10 years. Maru watched, hand in her father's, and understood something she'd never been taught. Some truths were prisons, some truths were keys. Maru saved her father. The empire fell. But the battle isn't over. Judge Valente is still out there. The conspiracy goes higher than anyone thought, and the people who want that ledger destroyed won't stop coming. Smash that like button if your heart is still racing. Comment below if you think Maru is the bravest person you've ever seen. The paramedic tent glowed like a paper lantern against the dark container yard. Portable heaters blasting. Thermal blankets piled 3 deep. Medical equipment beeping steady rhythms. Frankie lay on the stretcher, color slowly returning to his face as warmed IV fluids dripped into his arm. Maru sat beside him on a folding chair, gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. When a paramedic tried to check her over looking for shock, injury, anything a 10-year-old who'd just shot a man might be hiding, she'd refuse to move. I'm not letting go, she'd said. And she hadn't. Ada Navarro stood at the tent entrance with Agent Chen, both watching the scene with the careful distance of people who'd seen too many families shattered to trust happy endings. We need his statement, Chen said quietly. Before lawyers get involved. Before Santoro's people start building defenses. Give them 5 minutes, Ada replied. The kid just walked through hell to find him. Let her have this. Chen checked her watch, then nodded. 5 minutes. Then we need everything. Frankie's eyes opened fully, focusing on Maru's face, dirt-streaked, tear-stained, fierce. You shouldn't have come for me, he whispered. You would have come for me, Maru said simply. I'm your father, that's different. No, it's not. She squeezed his hand tighter. You taught me to protect what matters. So I did. Frankie's throat worked, emotions he'd kept locked for 10 years finally breaking surface. Baby, what I did, what I recorded, those people are dangerous. If they find out, you know. They already know, Maru interrupted. I gave them the ledger. The SD card. Everything. It's evidence now. It's not ours anymore. Frankie closed his eyes, and Ada saw it, relief and terror mixing into something that looked like surrender. Then I need to tell you the truth, Frankie said, before you hear it somewhere else. Before they twist it into something that makes me sound like a hero when I was just a coward for too long. Dad. 10 years ago, Frankie continued, voice gaining strength. I was called to Street Vincent's hospital. Emergency job. A boy had been in a car accident, fire. Bad burns. The Santoro family wanted a private viewing before the funeral, and they needed someone to make him look peaceful. He opened his eyes, staring at the tent ceiling like he was seeing that night projected above him. But when I got there, something was wrong. The burn patterns didn't match the story. His face was barely touched. The worst burns were on his hands, his arms defensive wounds, like he'd tried to shield himself. But his face? Frankie shook his head. His face was almost perfect. Maru listened, not understanding yet but knowing this was the center of everything. I started prepping him, Frankie continued. Standard procedure. But then he gasped. Just once. A tiny breath. And I realized he wasn't dead. The hospital had declared him, signed the paperwork, but he was still breathing. Ada stepped closer, recording device subtly activated. I called for help, Frankie said. Hit the emergency button. Started CPR. And Antonio Santoro, 17 years old, burned and broken, opened his eyes. He lived for 20 minutes, Frankie said, and the words fell like stones into still water. I kept him breathing, kept him conscious. He was terrified, in pain, confused. He kept asking where his father was, where Vito was. Tears tracked down Frankie's face now, slow and steady. He told me everything in those 20 minutes. The car wasn't an accident, someone ran him off the road. He'd seen a drug deal go bad at one of his father's clubs, seen a buyer get killed. He was scared to tell Vito because he thought his dad would be disappointed in him for being there. What happened? Maru whispered. A man came in, Frankie said, voice hollow. Well-dressed. Smelled like expensive cologne and whiskey. He saw Antonio was alive, saw me doing CPR, and he didn't panic. He just smiled. And he said, "Thank you for your service, but we'll take it from here." Frankie's hand trembled in Maru's grip. I said no, said I'd called for doctors. He pulled out a hospital badge, visitor credentials, fake name. Then he pulled out a checkbook and wrote me a number. $50,000 to walk away and forget I'd ever started a pulse. You didn't take it, Maru said with absolute certainty. I tried to fight him. Frankie corrected. But 2 security guards came in, the kind that aren't really hospital security. They dragged me out and locked the door. I heard Antonio screaming. Then I heard nothing. He looked at Maru, eyes red and raw. The man suffocated him with a pillow, finished what the fire started. And I was in the hallway listening, doing nothing. You were one person against killers, Maru said. I was a coward, Frankie said. But I kept the recording device running in my pocket. I recorded everything Antonio told me in those 20 minutes. His last words. His testimony. The name of the man he saw killed. And I recorded the man who murdered him, his voice, his threats, everything. Agent Chen entered the tent, laptop in hand. We've processed the SD card. Frankie, we need your permission to play this. Frankie nodded weakly. Play it. Chen set the laptop on a medical cart and hit play. The speakers crackled, and then whispers. Frankie's voice, barely audible, as if he were speaking from inside a tomb. Day 1. I can't sleep. I keep hearing Antonio Santoro asking for his father. I keep hearing him suffocate. I tried to go to the police today. I made it to the precinct steps. Then I saw Judge Valente leaving the captain's office, shaking hands, laughing, and I knew they owned the system. Another entry. Day 4. I'm recording this from the walk-in freezer at Serafino's. It's the only place I feel safe, cold, quiet, away from everyone. I've been researching the man who killed Antonio. His name is Derek Valente, the judge's nephew. 32, Yale law dropout, 3 DUIs all dismissed. He's untouchable. Another. Day 12. Vito Santoro buried his son today. Open casket. I did good work, nobody could tell. The boy had been suffocated. Vito stood there for an hour, just staring. And I wanted to tell him. God, I wanted to tell him his son died calling for him. But what good would it do? The people who killed Antonio own the judges. They own the cops. They'd kill me. They'd kill my daughter. The recordings continued a week's worth, each one more desperate than the last. Frankie Russo confessing to a machine what he couldn't confess to the world. Day 7. If something happens to me, Maru needs to know the truth. I'm writing down every account number, every transaction I've cleaned evidence for. I'm building insurance. Not for me, for her. So she'll never be defenseless. The final entry. They're calling me in tonight. Emergency cleanup at Serafino's. I think they know. I've hidden the drive, the ledger, the codes. Maru knows what to do if I'm late. I taught her everything. God forgive me. I taught my 10-year-old daughter how to survive my mistakes. Silence filled the tent. Ada stepped forward, holding up her phone. We also have this. Voicemail left on Rocco Bellini's phone 2 hours ago. His mother's caretaker called him in a panic. She played the message. An elderly woman's voice, sharp and clear despite her age. Rocco, it's Nonna Lucia. Tell Vito, tell my boy Antonio didn't die in the fire. Valente's nephew killed him. I saw the payments in the ledger years ago. I kept quiet because they said it would destroy the family. But I'm old now, and I'm tired of carrying the devil's secrets. Tell Vito the truth. Tell him before I forget again. The message ended. Outside the tent, still cuffed but allowed to stand under martial supervision, Vito Santoro listened to every word. His face, that carved marble mask that had terrified Brooklyn for decades, cracked completely. My aunt knew, he whispered. All this time, she knew. She kept your family's secrets, Ada said. Even the ones that killed you inside. Vito looked at Frankie through the tent's clear plastic window. He tried to save my son. For 20 minutes, he kept him alive. And I locked him in a freezer for it. Vito's voice broke. Because I was too afraid to know the truth. Too afraid to admit my empire was built on my son's grave. He sank against the container wall, a king dethroned not by force but by revelation. The ledger, Vito said. The accounts, the judge, it all traces back to the night they killed Antonio. They paid me to stay quiet. They've been paying me for 10 years, and I took it. I took blood money and called it justice. Inside the tent, Maru looked at her father, broken, crying, but finally unburdened. We're telling the truth, she said firmly. All of it. That's how you keep me safe. They'll come after us, Frankie protested. The judge, his people. Let them, Maru interrupted, because now the truth isn't just ours. It's evidence. It's testimony. It's on record. They can't bury it anymore. Frankie pulled her close, and she felt him shake with sobs he'd held for a decade. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry you had to be this brave. You taught me how, Maru said. Now let me teach you something. What? How to stop being scared. Frankie held his daughter and cried, not the tears of a criminal or a coward, but of a man finally thawing after 10 years in the cold. Outside, dawn began to break over Brooklyn. The vault was open. The truth was free, and a little girl had saved her father by refusing to let him hide. The arrests began at 6:47 a.m., exactly 48 hours after Maru had walked into that warehouse with a gun and a question. Federal Judge Marcus Valente was taken into custody at his Westchester estate. 3 FBI agents, 2 deputy marshals, cameras rolling as he emerged in a bathrobe and handcuffs, shouting about immunity and jurisdiction and the erosion of judicial respect. The charges read like a crime novel: corruption, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, racketeering. His nephew, Derek Valente, was arrested at a Manhattan hotel bar mid-cocktail. Yale law dropout, 3-time DUI beneficiary, the man who'd suffocated a 17-year-old boy to silence a witness, homicide, 1st degree. 10 years cold, now blazing hot with Frankie's audio testimony and Nonna Lucia's corroboration. By 9 a.m., Captain Raymond Torres of the 5th Precinct was perp-walked out of his own station house, along with his counterpart from the 7th. Both had taken Santoro money for years: protection, evidence tampering, advance warning on raids. The ledger Maru had carried in Mr. Hoppy documented every payment, every wire transfer, every moment they'd traded their badges for dirty cash. Port Authority bosses fell next: 3 terminal supervisors, 2 customs officials, 1 longshoreman union president. The container yard network that had smuggled everything from narcotics to human cargo unraveled like thread pulled from cheap fabric. By noon, 16 arrest warrants had been executed. By evening, the number climbed to 23. An empire built over decades collapsed in a single day. In a federal holding facility in Lower Manhattan, Vito Santoro sat across from Ada Navarro and Agent Chen, his lawyer beside him, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit who'd represented 3 generations of organized crime and never lost her poker face. My client, she began, is prepared to cooperate fully in exchange for specific assurances. Your client, Chen replied, kidnapped a federal witness and held a child at gunpoint. He's not in a position to negotiate. He had plenty of positions, the lawyer corrected. He chose to stand down. He chose to let your team walk into that container yard without a firefight. That counts for something. Ada leaned forward. What does he want? Vito spoke for himself, voice rough from exhaustion. Protection for Frankie Russo and his daughter. Ironclad. No retaliation from anyone in my network, anyone connected to the judge, anyone who might think settling old scores is worth the risk. You can't guarantee that, Ada said. I can put it on record that anyone who touches them answers to me, even from inside. Vito's eyes were flat, cold. I've got 20 years of leverage on every crew from here to Philadelphia. I'll burn every bridge, expose every operation, give you burial sites you didn't even know to look for, but the girl and her father walk away clean. Chen and Ada exchanged glances. Keep talking, Chen said. Vito did. He talked for 6 hours straight, no bathroom breaks, no food, just names, dates, locations. The off-book cemetery behind Serafino and Sons, where 7 bodies were buried under fake headstones. Drop networks running through Red Hook, Sunset Park, Bay Ridge, shell companies in Delaware, accounts in Malta, Cyprus, the Caymans, every skeleton in every closet, laid bare. You're destroying your own legacy, his lawyer said quietly. My legacy, Vito replied, died with my son. This is just burning down the lie I built on top of his grave. By midnight, federal teams were excavating behind the funeral home. By dawn, they'd found the first 3 bodies. Rocco, the monk Bellini, sat in a different interrogation room. Rosary wrapped around his knuckles, confession pouring out like he was back at Street Teresa's in the booth instead of under federal lights. I've been carrying this for 15 years, he said. Every collection I made, every beating I watched, every time I looked the other way, I told myself it was loyalty. Omerta. The code. But codes are just excuses when you use them to justify cruelty. He gave them everything. Enforcers. Money routes. The names of compromised officials Vito hadn't mentioned. Rocco had kept a separate ledger, a moral accounting, names and sins written in a journal he'd never shown anyone. Why now? Ada asked. Because a 10-year-old girl did what I couldn't, Rocco said simply. She walked into hell and dragged her father out, and I've been in hell for years, too scared to walk toward the light. When the statement was complete, Ada slid a witness security packet across the table. New name, new city, new life. You'll never see Brooklyn again. Rocco looked at the paperwork, the promise of salvation printed on government letterhead. What about my mother? He asked. She comes with you. Full relocation, medical care included. Rocco signed without hesitation. That afternoon he disappeared into the federal system, a ghost saving his soul the only way left. Dominic Snake Eyes Caruso sat in the hospital wing of the detention center, shoulder bandaged, face bruised from where he'd hit the container wall. Agent Chen offered him the same deal. Talk, and we'll consider reduced charges. Conspiracy instead of attempted murder. 20 years instead of life. Dom stared at her, then at the paperwork, then back. I got shot by a kid, he said. A 10-year-old with her daddy's gun. You know what that makes me in lockup? A joke, a punchline. But you know what flipping makes me? Alive, Chen said. Dead, Dom corrected. Just slower. Nah, I'll take my chances with the jury. Prison code I can live with. Rat code? That's a death sentence with no appeal. He pushed the papers back. We're done here. Chen studied him, broken, stubborn, choosing loyalty to a code over freedom, and closed her file. Your funeral, she said. Better than my confession, Dom replied. By the second day, the media had the bones of the story. Child informant brings down Brooklyn crime family. News vans camped outside the federal building. Reporters shouted questions at anyone in a suit. Speculation ran wild. Who was the child? How did she get the evidence? Was she trained by law enforcement? Ada Navarro stood at a podium in a press conference room, cameras flashing, and drew the line. The minor involved in this case is a protected witness. Her identity is sealed. Any publication that attempts to identify her will face federal obstruction charges. Any journalist who approaches her school, her home, or her family will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. The public has a right to know, a reporter started. The public, Ada interrupted, voice steel, has a right to see justice served, not to endanger a child who risked her life to expose corruption. Next question. Behind the scenes, Ada worked with the U.S. Marshals to scrub Maru's digital footprint, social media locked, school records sealed. even the 911 call audio redacted. She became a ghost in the system, evidence of her existence, but no trail leading to her door. "Why are you doing this?" Frankie asked when Ada visited their safe house. "Because I've got a daughter," Ada said. "And if she ever had to be that brave, I'd want someone protecting her too." 3 days after the arrests, in a federal safe house in Queens, Maru sat at a small desk with her school notebook spread out in front of her. For months, the margins had been filled with her father's codes, numbers that were coordinates, word problems that were escape routes, equations that were survival instructions. Now, slowly, she began to erase them. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she wanted to reclaim what math had been before it became a language of fear. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, "Problem. If Maru starts at home and walks 0.7 miles to school, then 0.3 miles to the library, how far does she walk total?" Simple, clean, just math. Frankie sat beside her watching. "You don't have to do homework right now, baby. You've been through." "I want to," Maru said. "I want to remember that math is just math, not codes, not hiding, just numbers." She solved the problem. 1 mile. Then another. If Maru has $10 and buys a book for $6.50, how much does she have left? Answer: $3.50. Problems with answers that didn't end in life or death. Frankie rested his hand on her shoulder. "You're gonna be okay, kiddo." "We both are," Maru corrected. Outside the window, unmarked cars kept watch. Inside, a little girl rewrote her world one equation at a time, proving that even after you've walked through hell, you can still find your way to simple truths. Numbers that meant nothing more than what they were. Freedom, calculated one problem at a time. The system had toppled. The guilty were caged. The corrupt had fallen. But systems, like people, leave scars. And in the quiet spaces between justice and healing, Maru and Frankie would learn what came next. How to live when survival was no longer the only math that mattered. The safe house sat at the end of a gravel road 3 hours north of the city, surrounded by pine trees that whispered in the wind and a lake that reflected clouds like broken mirrors. It was the kind of quiet that city people romanticize and fear in equal measure. No sirens, no traffic, no voices except your own echoing back. Maru hated it. Not because it wasn't beautiful. The geese that flew overhead in perfect V formations were beautiful. The way frost clung to the grass each morning was beautiful. But beauty didn't erase the fact that silence made her nightmares louder. She'd wake at 3 a.m., gasping, certain she was back in container 14B, breathing freezer air that tasted like metal and death. Her father's blue lips, Dom's gun, the crack of the Beretta in her hands. Every night, the same loop. Frankie would appear in her doorway within seconds. He wasn't sleeping well either, and sit on the edge of her bed until her breathing slowed. "You're safe," he'd whisper. "We're both safe." But safety felt like a word in a language she was still learning to speak. On the 4th morning, Frankie made breakfast, scrambled eggs that were somehow both runny and overdone, toast burned at the edges, and said, "We're going into town today." "Why?" Maru asked, pushing eggs around her plate. "Because there's something we need to do." 20 minutes later, they drove into the small upstate town in an unmarked sedan provided by the marshals, Deputy Kowalski trailing 2 cars behind. The town had one main street, a diner, a hardware store, a church with a white steeple, and a gun range that doubled as a sporting goods shop. Frankie parked in front of the range. "Dad?" Maru's voice was small. Frankie reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the Beretta unloaded, secured in a lockbox since the night at the port. He held it for a moment, then looked at his daughter. "This isn't ours anymore," he said. They walked inside together. The range owner, an older man with a gray beard and kind eyes, looked up from his register. "Help you folks?" "I need to surrender a firearm," Frankie said, setting the lockbox on the counter. "Legally. Properly. I want it out of my life." The man studied them, a tired father and a serious little girl, and seemed to understand more than what was spoken. "You got paperwork?" Frankie slid over the registration, the permit he'd maintained for years but never wanted to use. The man opened the lockbox, checked the weapon, nodded. "I can process the surrender. You'll get a receipt, case number, whole thing documented. Takes about 10 minutes. "Thank you," Frankie said. While the man filled out forms, Maru stared at the Beretta, the gun that had saved her father, the gun that had made her someone she didn't want to be. "I'm glad it's gone," she whispered. Frankie squeezed her shoulder. Me too, baby. Me too. The man handed over a receipt. All set. The firearm will be destroyed per state protocol. You folks have a good day. Outside, in the cold November air, Maru felt something loosen in her chest, a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. Not ours anymore, she repeated. Not ours anymore, Frankie agreed. That afternoon, Ada Navarro arrived at the safe house with a manila envelope and a folded church program. She sat at the small kitchen table with Frankie, while Maru made hot chocolate, a skill she'd perfected over the past 4 days, needing something simple she could control. New identities, Ada said, tapping the envelope. Birth certificates, social security cards, school records, medical histories. You're not Frankie and Maria Russo anymore. You're Frank and Maya Donovan, originally from Portland, recently relocated for work. Frankie stared at the envelope like it might bite him. This is real? Permanent? As permanent as we can make it. Judge Valente's network is collapsing, but there are still people who might want revenge. This gives you a clean break. What about our old lives? They don't exist on paper anymore. Frankie Russo is a federal witness in protective custody, location unknown. Maria Russo is a sealed juvenile case file. The people you were are ghosts. Maru set 3 mugs of hot chocolate on the table and sat down. Do we have to use the new names? In public, yes. At school, with neighbors, on documents. In private? Ada glanced at Frankie. You're still who you've always been, just safer. She slid the church program across the table. This came with a note from Rocco Bellini. He's settled in his new location. Wanted you to have this. Maru unfolded the program. Street Teresa's, a Sunday Mass from 3 months ago. On the back, in Rocco's handwriting, for the candles you'll light. For people who do dirty work so others don't have to. You were right, little one. There's hope for all of us. Maru pressed the program to her chest, eyes wet. He's okay? She asked. He's okay, Ada confirmed. He's finding his way just like you. Over the following days, father and daughter began the slow work of becoming themselves again. Frankie tried to cook burnt pancakes, oversalted soup, spaghetti that somehow turned into mush. Maru laughed at the disasters, and the sound was medicine. He wrote letters at night, apologies to people he'd failed, confessions to ghosts he'd created, explanations he'd never be able to send. Some he burned in the fireplace. Others he tucked into a drawer, private excavations of guilt. Why write them if you're not sending them? Maru asked one evening. Because I need to say the words, Frankie replied. Even if no one else hears them. Maru started keeping her own journal, not codes, not survival plans, but feelings she didn't know how to speak aloud. Fear, anger, confusion about why doing the right thing still felt so heavy. One entry read, I saved my dad, but I also shot someone. Does that make me bad? Does it make me like them? I don't know how to be a kid anymore. I don't know if I ever was. Frankie found it one morning. She'd left it open on the kitchen table, maybe intentionally, and his heart broke. That night, over another burnt dinner, he said, You're allowed to ask for help, Maru. You don't have to plan everything alone anymore. I don't know how, she admitted. Neither do I, Frankie said. But maybe we figure it out together. They started small, Maru asking for help with homework instead of Googling answers in secret, Frankie admitting when nightmares kept him awake instead of pretending he was fine. Learning to be imperfect together, instead of surviving alone. On the 8th day, Deputy Kowalski noticed the same gray sedan passing the safe house road 3 times in 2 hours. Slow, deliberate, windows tinted. He radioed Ada immediately. Within 20 minutes, 2 additional marshal units converged. They tracked the sedan to a gas station 5 miles out and boxed it in. The driver, a man with Santoro crew tattoos and a burner phone full of Brooklyn area codes, was arrested without incident. Who sent you? One marshal asked. Nobody sent me, the man replied. I just wanted to see if the rumors were true, if the cleaner and his kid were really untouchable now. And? The man looked at the 3 armed marshals surrounding him, then at the helicopter circling overhead. Guess they are. He was charged with witness intimidation and remanded to federal custody. His phone was scrubbed, his contacts traced, his entire network mapped. Ada called Frankie that evening. There was a probe, she said. Low-level Santoro loyalist testing the perimeter. He's in custody. No others detected. The message is clear. You're protected, and it's real." Frankie exhaled a breath he'd been holding for days. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Vito's agreement and the fact that his word still carries weight even from inside. Anyone who comes after you answers to him, and right now, his answer is a long federal sentence." That night, Maru and Frankie sat by the fireplace, the only light in the safe house, the flickering orange glow of burning wood. "Do you think we'll ever feel normal?" Maru asked. Frankie considered the question. "I don't know what normal is anymore, but I think we'll feel safe. Eventually." "How long is eventually?" "However long it takes." Maru leaned against her father's shoulder, and for the first time since the warehouse, she felt the knot in her chest loosen just a little more. Outside, geese called across the lake. Inside, a father and daughter began the slow work of letting go of guns, of fear, of the people they'd had to become to survive. Not ours anymore. Just theirs. Safe. Healing isn't fast, and it isn't easy, but Maru and Frankie are finally learning what it means to be safe. One last chapter remains, the epilogue that shows where they land, who they become, and whether a little girl who had to be a soldier can ever just be a kid again. Hit that like button if this journey has moved you, drop a comment about what healing means to you, and click now for the final chapter. You've come this far, see how their story ends. The federal courthouse in downtown Brooklyn was built like a fortress, limestone and glass, metal detectors and armed guards, the kind of building designed to remind you that justice was both a protection and a cage. Maru sat in the gallery beside her father, wearing a navy dress Ada had bought her specifically for this day. She felt like she was dressed for a funeral, which, in a way, she was. The burial of an empire. The final eulogy for secrets that had lived too long. At the defense table, Vito Santoro sat in a gray suit, not the black he'd worn the night of the warehouse, but softer, like he'd already begun fading into something less than he'd been. His hands were folded on the table, no cuffs today per courtroom protocol, but two marshals flanked him like parentheses around a sentence already written. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and a voice like a closing argument, stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the government would like to enter into evidence Item 47C, audio testimony recorded by witness Lucia Santoro, corroborating the homicide of Antonio Santoro and implicating Judge Marcus Valente and his nephew, Derek Valente, in conspiracy to commit murder." The judge, a different judge, one whose hands were clean, nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom speakers crackled, and Nonna Lucia's voice filled the room, sharp, lucid, damning. "Antonio didn't die in the fire. They finished him at the hospital. Valente's nephew. I saw the payment ledgers, 50,000 to the cleaner to walk away. Another 100 to the hospital administrator. 200 to make the coroner's report say accidental. I kept the books. I kept quiet. God forgive me. I chose my family over the truth." The recording continued. Every number, every name, every transaction that had buried a boy and built a lie on top of his grave. Vito sat motionless, but Maru saw it the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes closed briefly as if absorbing blows he'd spent a decade avoiding. When the recording ended, the prosecutor entered Frankie's audio diary, 7 days of whispered confessions from a freezer, a man unraveling under the weight of what he'd witnessed. Frankie's voice, thin and scared. "I tried to save him. For 20 minutes, I kept him breathing. And then they took him from me and finished what the fire started. I'm recording this because if I die, someone needs to know what really happened. Someone needs to know Antonio Santoro called for his father with his last breath." Maru felt her father's hand tighten around hers. In the defendant's row, Vito's shoulders shook once, a silent sob he swallowed before it could escape. When the recess was called, the gallery began to empty. Marshals moved to escort Vito back to holding, but he paused, turning toward the public seating. His eyes found Maru's. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the courtroom, a crime lord and a 10-year-old girl who'd dismantled everything he'd built by asking one question he couldn't silence. "Where is my father?" Vito's face, carved and cold for so long, softened into something almost human. Grief, regret, acknowledgement. He nodded once. Not a gesture of defeat, not quite forgiveness either. An admission that only the two of them understood. "You were right to break me. I needed to be broken." Maru nodded back, small, solemn, final. Then the marshals guided Vito through the side door, and he disappeared into the system he'd once owned, now just another number in a federal ledger. Frankie leaned close to Maru. "You okay?" Yeah, she said quietly. I think I am. They walked to the waterfront after the hearing. Ada had cleared it with the protective detail, and Maru had asked specifically to go back to Red Hook, to see the place where all of this had started. The pier stretched into the East River like a finger pointing toward Manhattan's skyline, glass towers catching the afternoon sun, ferries cutting white wakes through gray-green water. Gulls circled overhead, heckling each other over scraps of bread some tourist had thrown. It smelled like salt and diesel and the particular funk of a working waterfront that no amount of gentrification could erase. Frankie stood beside his daughter at the railing, his hand resting on her shoulder. She wore jeans and a hoodie now, the funeral dress abandoned in the car, and her backpack sat at her feet. You want to talk about it? Frankie asked. Not yet, Maru said. Maybe later. Right now I just want to look at the water. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city move around them, joggers on the greenway, couples walking dogs, a group of kids playing soccer on the pier's concrete expanse. Normal life, the kind Maru had almost forgotten existed. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out Mr. Hoppy, the stuffed rabbit that had carried a thumb drive, a ledger, and the weight of 10 years' worth of secrets. Ada had returned him last week, evidence processed, no longer needed. Maru had taken him to a seamstress in the upstate town, had the torn seam professionally repaired, the stuffing refreshed. He looked almost new now, except for the chewed ear and the loose button eye scars that told his story. But inside, where the evidence had been, Maru had packed different things: pencils, erasers, a calculator, a notebook with clean pages waiting for equations that were just equations. School supplies for Maya Donovan, 5th grader, new student, ordinary kid. He looks good, Frankie said, nodding at the rabbit. He's lighter now, Maru replied, without all the secrets. Yeah, I know that feeling. Maru looked up, not at a warehouse roof with rusted beams and the threat of violence, but at open sky streaked with contrails from departing planes. The ceiling of her world had lifted. She looked out, not at concrete walls and shadows, but at water stretching toward the horizon, the Statue of Liberty, a distant green figure holding her torch against the afternoon light. She breathed in not freezer air that tasted like metal and death, but salt, wind that stung and cleansed in equal measure. Warm. Alive. The city hadn't changed. Brooklyn still sprawled behind them, bodegas and brownstones, corner boys and church bells, the machinery of survival grinding forward like it always had. The waterfront still smelled like diesel. The gulls still screamed. The Santoro network's ghosts still haunted back alleys and burial sites behind funeral homes. But something fundamental had shifted. A lock that had held the city in place, invisible, brutal, absolute, had been opened. Not by force, not by violence. By a question. Where is my father? The simplest question, the most powerful. Because it forced a man who'd built vaults around his conscience to acknowledge what he'd locked inside, the truth about his son, the price of his empire, the human cost of keeping secrets. And once opened, vaults don't close the same way. What are you thinking about? Frankie asked. Maru was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm thinking about how much I missed the water. Even when we were just a few miles away, in that safe house upstate, I missed hearing it. It's always been here. I know. But I couldn't come back until now. Until it was safe. She turned to look at her father. Do you think we'll stay here? In New York? Or will they move us somewhere else? Ada says we can choose. New identities work anywhere. We could go to Portland, like our paperwork says, or stay here, just in a different neighborhood. I want to stay, Maru said immediately. This is home, even after everything. Even after everything, Frankie agreed. A ferry horn sounded low and mournful, a sound as old as the harbor itself. Maru shouldered her backpack, Mr. Hoppy tucked safely inside, and took her father's hand. Come on, she said. Let's go home. They walked back along the pier, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun, a father and daughter who'd walked through fire and freezing dark, and emerged on the other side, scarred but whole. Behind them, the water moved like it always had, indifferent, eternal, witness to a million stories of arrival and escape, crime and redemption, questions asked and answers that changed everything. The city hadn't softened. The docks hadn't been cleansed of their ghosts. But the vault that had ruled them, the one built of silence and fear and secrets too heavy to carry, had finally opened. Because a 10-year-old girl asked the only question a vault can't swallow. Where is my father? And in answering, an empire learned what every locked door eventually discovers. Truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to ask. And that's how a little girl with a stuffed rabbit and her father's gun brought down an empire not with violence, but with the one question that could unlock a vault built on lies. This story started in a warehouse and ended at the water's edge, with a father and daughter finally free. If this story moved you, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest, and share this with someone who needs to remember that even the smallest voice can topple the biggest walls. Thank you for following Maru's journey. Truth always finds a way, especially when a brave kid refuses to let it hide. The end.